My name is Alana Pierce. The morning they buried my husband, the house still smelled like his cologne. Faint, clean, expensive. The kind of scent that makes people think everything's fine, even when it's not. I remember standing in the doorway, holding my breath, pretending the air didn't ache. His mother was in the living room, rearranging the flowers I'd paid for, whispering to her sisters about how I'd handled the finances too well. That was her code for we don't trust her. They spoke as if I were invisible, as if I hadn't just buried the man I built a life with. Every word felt like a slow dissection, gentle hands cutting away my peace. And when the lawyer came, when he said the deed wasn't in their family name but in his and mine, you could have heard the silence drop like glass. That's when they turned on me, and still, I smiled. Because I'd seen this coming long before the coffin. Before we move on, I need to be honest with you. My heart sank when I saw that 99% of you watch my videos but don't subscribe. It truly means the world when you do. It helps stories like this find the people who need them. So please take a second to subscribe, and don't forget to tell me where you're watching from. I love seeing your locations. It reminds me that stories really do connect us, no matter where we are. The day after the funeral, the rain didn't stop. It hung in the air like grief, a kind of soft, endless drizzle that blurred the world into watercolor. The house was too quiet, too clean, like someone had scrubbed away not just the dirt but the evidence that a man once lived here. I remember walking barefoot across the polished wood floors, the cold biting my soles, thinking how strange it was that death could make a place feel sterile. They were all downstairs, his mother, her sisters, his cousins. Every one of them dressed in shades of mourning that looked too carefully chosen. I could hear their voices rising and falling like waves of judgment, small and sharp. Words like responsibility and documents floated up through the staircase, coated with politeness. I stayed upstairs, in our bedroom, where the air still smelled faintly like his skin, cedar, soap, and something I couldn't name. Grief is supposed to break you. But mine didn't. It settled in me like a stone. Heavy, immovable, cold. When I finally walked downstairs, all their conversations stopped at once. It was almost comical, like someone had hit pause on a movie. His mother, Evelyn, looked up at me from the sofa. She was holding a teacup she hadn't touched. "Alana," she said, her voice all sugar and steel. "You look pale, baby. You should rest. We've been talking about some arrangements. That word carried the kind of weight that doesn't sound dangerous until you breathe around it. "I'm fine," I said quietly. "What kind of arrangements?" Her eyes flicked toward her sister, who gave a small, smug smile. "You've got a lot to think about, I know," Evelyn continued. "The house, for one. It was in our family before you came along, and until the estate's settled, it might be best if you— Best if I what?" I asked. My tone wasn't sharp. I never needed sharpness. Just silence, used properly. "Stayed somewhere else," she finished. "Temporarily, of course. Until things are sorted." I could feel every eye in that room waiting for me to break, waiting for the widow to show her cracks. But I'd learned long ago that silence unnerves people more than rage. I just stood there, one hand resting against the frame of the doorway, watching her sip tea she didn't need. "His name's still on the deed," I said softly. "And mine." Something flickered in her face, the smallest tremor gone as fast as it came. "That may be true," she said, recovering, "but these things take time. Lawyers, paperwork. You wouldn't want to get tangled in confusion." Confusion. That was their favorite tool, a fog of kindness used to blur the line between theft and help. I smiled. "You're right. Confusion can be dangerous." And for a second, she thought she'd won. I could see it in her posture, the way her shoulders relaxed, the faint curl of satisfaction at the corner of her lips. I turned toward the staircase. My fingers brushed the banister he'd built himself, the one she'd always said was too modern for a Pierce home. Halfway up, I paused. "Evelyn?" "Yes, dear?" "When the lawyer calls," I said without turning around, "you should probably answer. He's got some documents you'll want to see." I didn't wait for her reply. I just kept walking, each step slow, deliberate, echoing through the hollow house. By the time I reached our bedroom, the rain had grown louder, a steady percussion against the glass. I sat on the edge of the bed and stared at the framed photo of us on the nightstand. He was smiling in that quiet, knowing way he had when he thought he'd pulled off something clever. And I realized then, maybe he had. Maybe he saw this coming long before I did. I opened his drawer, found the brown envelope he'd labeled private, and slid it under my arm. The house was full of people, yet I had never felt so alone, or so certain. Downstairs, someone laughed too loudly. A brittle, nervous sound. I could almost taste the tension in the air, metallic and thick. I closed the bedroom door, drew the curtains halfway, and sat in the muted gray light. The envelope lay across my lap like an unanswered question. When I finally opened it, the first thing I saw wasn't paper. It was a key, small, silver, unfamiliar. I held it in my palm and felt a strange calm wash over me. Whatever they thought they were about to take from me, they had no idea what I still had left to find. And that's when I knew the war hadn't begun at the funeral. It had started long before, and he'd left me the map, fade to black. The phone rang just after dawn. I hadn't slept, only drifted in and out of thoughts that felt more like hauntings. The ledger lay open beside my bed, the receipt for the safety deposit box still pressed between its pages like scripture. I almost didn't answer. But the number flashed familiar. First Union Bank. Mrs. Pierce? The voice said, careful, professional, as if each word had been weighed before release. This is Daniel Harper from the branch on Main. I'm calling regarding a matter your husband left unresolved. We need your authorization to proceed. My throat tightened. What kind of matter? A pause. The kind that carries more meaning than words ever could. It involves a joint account and a deposit box. If you're available, I'd recommend coming in personally. Today, if possible. The calmness in his voice wasn't neutral. It was practiced. The kind of calm people use when they're afraid of saying too much. I'll be there in an hour, I said. When I hung up, the house was still dark. The rain had stopped, but the sky was the color of unspoken things. Gray, endless, unfinished. I dressed quietly, pulling my hair back into a low bun. No makeup. Just foundation, mascara, composure. The kind of armor that looks like grace. Downstairs, the family was already awake. Evelyn sat at the kitchen table, her rosary beads clicking softly in her hand like a metronome of judgment. Her sisters whispered over toast. The smell of burnt coffee hung in the air. You're up early, Evelyn said without looking at me. I have an errand, I replied, reaching for my keys. What kind of errand? I smiled, and a small, polite thing. The kind that keeps the lights on. I left before she could respond. The drive to the bank felt longer than usual. The streets were still wet, reflecting the pale morning light like sheets of glass. When I pulled into the parking lot, a flock of blackbirds scattered from the power lines, wings cutting the sky in uneven rhythm. I took it as a sign. Maybe warning. Maybe approval. Inside, the air smelled of paper and disinfectant. The kind of sterile comfort that promises safety but hides bureaucracy. Daniel Harper was waiting near the entrance, a man in his 40s, kind eyes, posture stiff with discretion. Mrs. Pierce, he said, offering his hand. I'm sorry for your loss. Would you come with me, please? He led me into a small office, glass walls, beige carpet, a portrait of some smiling founder. On the desk was a folder stamped confidential. This won't take long, he said. I just need to confirm your identification and co-sign this release form. Your husband's account was updated 3 months ago, right before his passing. Updated how? I asked. He hesitated. He added your name to several holdings that were previously separate. It's unusual, considering the timing, but perfectly valid. I could feel my heart slow in that strange way it does when your mind races faster than your pulse. And the box? He nodded toward the vault. He specified joint access. You're now the sole authorized party. We walked through the hallway to the vault. the air cooler, denser, almost sacred. The heavy door groaned open, and the metallic scent of old money filled the room. Daniel handed me a key identical to the one from the envelope. "I'll step out while you review the contents," he said softly. When the latch clicked behind him, I opened the box. Inside was another envelope, thick, sealed, with my name written in his handwriting. Beneath it, a small flash drive and a folded sheet of paper. My fingers trembled as I broke the seal. Inside, one sentence: "If they ever try to erase you, tell them the deed remembers my name." I exhaled, slow, controlled. The words didn't just sound like protection, they sounded like foresight. He'd known. Every lie, every whisper, every plan they were laying. I pocketed the flash drive and the letter, locked the box, and walked out with steady steps. Daniel met my gaze with something like understanding, but said nothing. As I stepped outside, the morning sun had finally broken through the clouds. The light was gold, sharp, alive, almost holy. I stood there for a moment, the warmth on my face, the weight of the secret pressing against my chest. They wanted me gone. But the truth? He'd already written me into the foundation of everything they thought they owned. And when they found out, it wouldn't be grief they'd feel. It would be fear, fade to black. They called it a family meeting, but everyone knew it was a trial. Evelyn's text came mid-afternoon, her tone sugary as always. "Sweetheart, can you come by the house tonight? We need to talk through a few details, just to make sure we're all on the same page." I stared at the screen for a long time. The phrase "same page" hit differently when you already knew they were rewriting the book behind your back. By sunset, I was standing in the driveway again. The house, their house, not mine anymore in their eyes, glowed with that strange, false warmth only expensive homes can have. Candles in every window. The illusion of welcome. Inside, the atmosphere was taut, sweetly rehearsed. Evelyn sat at the head of the dining table like a queen presiding over subjects who owed her rent in grief. Thomas was beside her, his shirt sleeves rolled up, pretending casualness. His wife Marlene smiled with the kind of politeness that hides contempt between teeth. "Alana," Evelyn said, gesturing to the chair at the far end of the table. "We're so glad you came." "Of course," I said. "You said we needed to talk." Evelyn folded her hands. "Yes, we've been reviewing David's affairs. There's confusion. The lawyer mentioned that the property deed has both your names, but as you know, the house has been in our family for generations. It's not about money, darling. It's about preserving legacy." Her voice dripped with civility, but her eyes betrayed calculation. Thomas leaned forward, playing the part of peacemaker. "We're just trying to figure out what David really wanted, you know? He was sick. He might have made decisions under pressure." My pulse didn't change. I'd learned that silence can be a mirror. The longer you hold it, the more truth people show you trying to fill it. After a pause, I smiled faintly. "You think I pressured him?" "Not intentionally, of course," Thomas said quickly, though his smirk betrayed him. "But things get emotional near the end," Evelyn sighed dramatically. "We just want what's fair." The word fair caught in the air like static. I leaned back, folded my hands. "And what exactly does fair look like to you?" Marlene spoke for the first time, her tone sharp but wrapped in velvet. "You moving out. Temporarily, of course. Until probate clears. It's better for everyone that way. We'll make sure you're taken care of." Taken care of? Another code phrase. The kind that meant controlled, silenced, paid off. I watched them all for a moment. Their coordination was almost beautiful, like vultures circling in perfect formation. They'd practiced this, maybe for weeks, maybe longer. I took a breath, slow, deliberate, grounding myself in the weight of the secret letter folded inside my jacket. "You're right," I said softly. "David cared deeply about fairness. That's why he made sure everything was documented. Every deed, every signature, every transfer." Evelyn's eyes narrowed. "What are you implying?" "Nothing," I said, standing. "Only that the lawyer will be in touch soon. He has something you'll all want to see." Her hand twitched, clutching her rosary. "Don't threaten me, Alana." "I wouldn't dream of it," I said, voice calm as water. "I just think it's time everyone knew what he wanted." The silence that followed was thick enough to taste. Thomas shifted in his seat, suddenly restless. Evelyn's lips pressed together, not in sadness, but in calculation. "Before you go," she said, "I hope you'll remember that this family took you in. We loved you." I met her eyes. "You loved his name." I turned, and the wooden floor creaked beneath my heels like punctuation. As I reached the doorway, I paused, feeling their stares burn against my back. "I'm not your enemy," I said quietly, "but I won't be your casualty either." And then I walked out. The air outside was cold, sharp, alive. My breath rose in small clouds as I reached the car. For the first time since the funeral, I felt something close to peace. Not because I was safe, but because the war was now visible. I drove home without turning on the radio. The night was full of rhythm. My heartbeat, the soft hum of the engine, the echo of her voice saying fair. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a thought hit me so hard it made me stop the car mid-motion. They're not afraid of losing the house, I realized. They're afraid of what's inside it. The first night after the meeting, I couldn't sleep. The house was too still, like it was waiting to hear what I'd do next. Grief had its own pulse, faint, irregular, but constant, and mine thudded under my ribs like a secret rhythm. Every creak of wood sounded like a question I hadn't answered yet. I brewed coffee I didn't need and carried it to David's office, where the ledgers still sat in perfect order, as if he might return any minute to continue the work he'd left unfinished. The lamp's amber glow fell across the desk, softening the edges of my exhaustion. If I'd learned anything from years in his shadow, it was that power hides in paperwork. People like Evelyn worshipped inheritance, the visible kind. They never thought to look for the invisible wealth, the one written in numbers and codes. I opened the ledger again. Page after page of transactions, cleanly written, carefully justified, until they weren't. There it was, a slow siphoning. Small withdrawals from an account labeled Pierce Investments, then reappearing as consulting fees under Thomas's company, TMB Logistics. At first, I told myself it couldn't mean what it looked like. But then I remembered David's eyes in those last weeks. Tired, alert, carrying the kind of awareness you can't confess out loud, I whispered. "You knew they were taking from you." I pulled my laptop closer and started tracing the account numbers online. Passwords, encryption, verification codes, all things I'd once watched him do absent-mindedly while sipping coffee. My hands shook a little, but I kept going. Half an hour later, I was staring at it, an offshore account registered to a holding company in Nassau. The same signature, the same transfers. I felt my stomach twist, not from shock but recognition. This wasn't just greed. It was collaboration. His brother had been bleeding him dry while pretending to help. And David. Maybe he'd been letting it happen, long enough to understand the shape of betrayal before sealing the final terms of his will. The glow of the screen reflected in my cup. A ripple of black light and numbers. I felt the strange calm that comes when clarity replaces confusion. I wasn't crying anymore. I was calculating. Then came the sound, a soft knock. 3 taps, slow, deliberate. It was after midnight. I froze. The knock came again, got louder, closer. I glanced at the reflection in the window. A shape on the porch. A man's silhouette. When I opened the door, Marcus stood there. David's cousin. His eyes looked heavier than I remembered, like sleep and guilt had abandoned him at the same time. "Sorry it's late," he said, his voice too casual. "I just wanted to check in. Aunt Evelyn said you seemed stressed." The lie was too polite to sound real. "I'm fine," I said. "Just paperwork." He nodded, glancing past me into the house. "Yeah. There's a lot to sort through after someone passes." He hesitated, then added, "You know, David told me once he was planning to move some things around financially. Said he didn't want anyone caught off guard. Did he ever finish that?" There it was, the test. I smiled faintly. "You'd have to ask him. Marcus chuckled, pretending I'd made a joke. But his eyes stayed fixed on the envelope on the entryway table, the one marked with the bank's seal. I moved slightly, blocking his view. "You should get some rest," I said. "These late visits aren't good for either of us." He hesitated a moment longer, then gave that slow nod men give when they've decided to retreat. "For now." "You're right. Just wanted to make sure you weren't alone in all this." "I'm never alone," I said quietly. "Not in this house." He frowned, uncertain whether to take that as comfort or warning. "Night, Alana." When the door closed, I leaned my back against it, listening until his footsteps faded into the gravel. I returned to the desk. The coffee had gone cold, but the fire in my chest hadn't. The laptop screen blinked once before the connection timed out, the last page freezing on a figure so large it almost looked imaginary. I whispered his name, David, as if the sound alone could steady me. The pattern was clear now. The theft. The laundering. The silence. And suddenly, I saw the truth. They weren't fighting for the house. They were fighting to bury the evidence. The house wasn't inheritance, it was cover. I closed the laptop, turned off the lamp, and stood in the dark, feeling the old wood breathe under my feet. The family thought they were dealing with the same quiet woman they'd always underestimated, the one who'd host dinners, sign checks, stay polite, but I wasn't her anymore. Now, I was the ledger, the record, the proof, and ghosts, after all, don't stay quiet forever. Morning came without permission. The light pushed its way through the curtains, pale and intrusive, finding the exhaustion I hadn't shaken off. I hadn't really slept, just drifted between thoughts, like walking barefoot through glass. The house was too quiet again. But quiet can lie. It's never truly silence, it's just everything waiting. When I walked into the kitchen, the first thing I noticed was the front door. It wasn't locked. I was sure I had turned the deadbolt after Marcus left. I could still hear the click in my memory. Sharp, deliberate. Now, it hung slightly ajar. I felt a slow shiver trace up my arms. The air inside the house was colder than it should have been. The kind of cold that doesn't come from temperature but presence. Something unseen shifting just out of reach. I stepped closer, pushing the door shut. No footprints on the porch, no signs of entry. Just that faint, metallic scent. Old rain and something else. Burnt dust, maybe. I made coffee again, because that's what you do when you don't want to think about fear. You ritualize it. I watched the dark liquid swirl and thought about David's handwriting. The way he used to loop his R's like tiny anchors, steadying every sentence. By the time I sat down, there was another knock. Not 3 taps this time. Just one. Loud enough to echo. My throat tightened. Through the window, I saw a uniform. Police. I opened the door, slower this time. A tall man stood there, mid-40s, gray at the temples, eyes that looked like they'd seen too much and still weren't sure what to make of any of it. "Mrs. Pierce?" he asked. "Yes." "I'm Detective Morgan. I wanted to follow up on a few details regarding your husband's passing. May I come in?" His voice was steady, but I could feel the unspoken layer beneath it. Curiosity, caution, maybe even suspicion. I let him in. He walked with that particular kind of patience people use when they're scanning a space without seeming to. His eyes moved across the photos on the wall. David and I at our wedding, the family dinners, the vacations no one really enjoyed but pretended to. "Nice home," he said absently. It was David's pride. He stopped near the desk. "Mind if I ask what you've been working on?" I didn't look up from my cup, just trying to make sense of what he left behind. He nodded. "I understand. It's never simple, is it? Especially when there's money involved." There it was again, that tone. The one people use when they want you to fill in the blanks for them. I stayed silent. He picked up the edge of one of the Ledger's, the closed one, and ran a thumb over the embossed initials. Pierce Investments. He had quite a network. He was careful with details, I said. The detective smiled faintly. So I've heard. Then he reached into his coat and pulled out a small evidence bag. Inside was a flash drive. This was found in your husband's car, he said. It was lodged under the driver's seat. We haven't opened it yet. Chain of custody and all that. But his brother mentioned you might know what he was working on before he passed. I froze, but only for a second. His brother said that? Yes. Thomas, right? He was very forthcoming. Of course he was. I met the detective's eyes. No, I don't know what that is, but if David hid it, he had a reason. He studied me for a moment longer, then nodded, tucking the flash drive back into his pocket. If you think of anything, you can reach me here. He handed me his card. Try to get some rest, Mrs. Pierce. When he left, the air in the room seemed to rearrange itself, as if the house exhaled after holding its breath too long. I waited until his car disappeared down the hill before I pulled the ledger back out. David hid the flash drive, I thought. But why leave the ledgers behind, unless he wanted me to find them, unless the two were pieces of the same confession, one written, one encrypted? I went upstairs into the room we'd shared. The faint smell of cedar lingered in the closet, along with a coat he hadn't worn in months. I reached into the pocket. Nothing. The next, a folded slip of paper. Numbers. A date. A word. Vault. I looked at it until my vision blurred. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I whispered, I'll find it, David. Downstairs, the house groaned again. Wood shifting. The sound of something settling. But then faintly, from the other room, I heard a sound that didn't belong to the house at all. A soft mechanical click, like a USB drive being plugged into a laptop, and my blood ran cold. I didn't move at first. The sound rooted me, that soft electronic click slicing through the stillness like a pulse. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe the fridge, maybe the old wiring, but I knew better. I stepped carefully into the study, each breath measured, each creak of the floor echoing like a whisper too loud. The laptop was open on the desk, David's laptop, the same one the family had asked about after the funeral. The one I'd kept locked away. Now it was on. The screen glowed with a faint blue light, humming like a secret trying to speak. For a moment, I just stared. Then I saw it. The cursor blinking beside a folder I hadn't opened before. The name was simple, almost mocking. Evelyn. I felt a strange calm settle over me, the kind that doesn't come from safety, but from clarity. I sat down. Inside the folder were videos, short clips, timestamps, recordings from the months before David died. The first one opened automatically. David's face filled the screen, drawn, tired, but alert in that quiet, precise way he always had when he was thinking through something dangerous. If you're watching this, he said, then you already know the will isn't the problem. They are. Evelyn, Thomas, Marlene, they've been taking money for years. Not from me, from the foundation. I've covered it as long as I could, but it's gone too far. His voice cracked on the last line. I left everything in both our names for a reason, Alana. Because I trust you to finish what I couldn't. I didn't realize I was crying until I tasted salt. I clicked through the next file, a spreadsheet, then another video, then scanned receipts. The kind of proof you could bury a reputation with. And in the final file, a scanned letter addressed to Detective Morgan. If anything happens to me, this drive contains all necessary documentation. The clock in the corner of the screen read 1:03 a.m. That was the night before he died. A soft nausea rolled through me. I pushed back from the desk, breathing shallow. Someone had wanted this drive gone. And now it was in the police's hands, except I had the copy David made, hidden in plain sight. But one thing kept turning over in my head like a splinter. How had it plugged itself in? I scanned the table again, my reflection trembling in the dark glass of the screen. Then I noticed the light from the hallway. It wasn't the same golden hue from before. It was cooler, dimmer. I turned. The front door was open again. Only this time, the cold air carried movement. Footsteps retreating fast, crunching gravel. I ran outside, barefoot, heart slamming against my ribs. The street was empty, except for the faint shape of a car disappearing down the hill, taillights blinking red through the mist. I didn't chase it. I just stood there, shaking, gripping the doorframe. The night pressed against me, thick and listening. I knew then this wasn't just family greed anymore. It was cover-up, corruption. Someone who had already crossed the line between inheritance and intent. Back inside, I locked every window, every door. Then I slid the USB drive from the laptop, wrapped it in a towel, and hid it inside the vent behind the bookshelf, the one David once used for documents during renovations. I sat on the floor afterward, head against my knees. The hum of the fridge returned, the house pretending everything was normal. But normal was gone, because David hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a weapon, and whoever came tonight, they knew I had it. I didn't leave the house for 2 days. The world outside kept spinning. The sound of mail trucks, neighbors, dogs, kids riding bikes. But in here, time folded in on itself. Every hour tasted like smoke and static. Grief and suspicion make strange companions. They sharpen each other until you can't tell one from the other. On the morning of the 3rd day, I woke up to the smell of burning paper. I ran downstairs barefoot, heart hammering. But it wasn't fire, not yet. Just a scorch mark in the sink, ashes swirling in the faint draft from the window. And there, resting on the counter, was a half-burned envelope. My name still visible on the front. I picked it up carefully. The handwriting wasn't David's. It was Evelyn's. Inside was a single note, written in the sharp, slanted cursive I knew too well. You've misunderstood. This isn't about you. It never was. Walk away before you lose more than a house. No signature. No return address. But the postmark was from 2 towns over. The same place Thomas owned a storage facility. I let the ashes fall into the sink and turned on the tap, washing them away. The note disintegrated like old guilt. Still, the words clung to me. Walk away before you lose more than a house. I made coffee again, though my hands trembled enough to spill it. The steam rose in soft, ghostly ribbons, curling toward the ceiling like prayers no one was listening to. That was when I decided. I wouldn't walk away. Not this time. I drove to the Foundation's old office, the one David had run before the board forced him to step back due to his illness. I still had the keys. The parking lot was cracked and overgrown, a monument to neglect. Inside, dust floated in narrow beams of light. The air smelled like forgotten files and stale air conditioning. I went straight to the archives. The cabinets still bore his handwriting. Dates, initials, tidy order. I found the drawer marked Donor Accounts 2017-2022 and opened it. Empty. Every folder was gone, except one. Inside, a single sheet of paper, a ledger reference, account 4117B, Evelyn Pierce Holdings. Next to it, a notation in David's handwriting. Transfer trace to Shell account. Same bank, same signatory. I leaned against the cabinet, dizzy. Evelyn had been stealing from the Foundation, laundering it through her own company, under David's nose, using his name. That's why she needed me gone. That's why the family wanted the house, not for the property, but for whatever evidence David left behind inside its walls. And now, they knew I was looking. I drove home just before dusk, headlights catching the fog rising off the road. When I pulled into the driveway, I noticed something small, metallic, Glinting in the gravel, a single cufflink. Thomas's. The same kind he wore to the family meeting. My breath came short. He'd been here. I crouched, picking it up, feeling its cold weight in my palm. Then I heard it, faint, distant, the soft hum of another car engine idling somewhere down the street. I didn't turn around. I just walked inside, locked the door, and went straight to the bookshelf. The vent cover was half unscrewed. The drive was gone. For a moment, the room spun, a cold, empty silence filling the space where resolve used to live. I sank to the floor, eyes on the vent, the echo of David's last words looping in my mind. I trust you to finish what I couldn't. They had taken the proof, but they hadn't taken me, and they still didn't know about the letter, the one I'd never told anyone existed. The one with David's signature was still wet when I found it. It wasn't just inheritance anymore. It was a map, and if I followed it right, I could burn down everything they'd built on lies. Night had a pulse that evening, a low electric hum running through the walls, through me. I couldn't sit still. Every light in the house was off except for the one above the dining table, where the letter lay flat like a relic. It was the last thing David had written by hand, and the only thing I'd never turned over to anyone. Not the lawyer, not the detective, and definitely not Evelyn. I'd kept it hidden inside the lining of my suitcase, the one I took to the hospital during his final week. The envelope was unmarked, sealed with tape that had lost its stick over time. My name written in his steady, looping script, Alana. I took a slow breath and unfolded it carefully, the paper crackling like dry leaves. His handwriting looked smaller here, more fragile, as if he'd written it while he still believed time was on his side. Alana, if you're reading this, I didn't get the chance to tell you everything. They'll come for the house first. Not because they need it, but because it hides what they fear. In the basement, behind the old wine rack, there's a panel. You'll see a crack near the lower hinge. Inside, there's a safety deposit key, box number 17B. It holds the original account statements, proof of transfer, and Evelyn's authorization codes. You'll understand when you see it. Don't trust anyone from the family. Not even Morgan, he's one of them. Finish what I couldn't. D. I read it twice, then a third time, tracing each word with my fingertip as though I could touch him through the ink. When I finally looked up, the shadows seemed deeper. Don't trust Morgan. That sentence pulsed in my mind, sour and heavy. The detective had known too much, too soon. He'd shown up before any official follow-up was scheduled. He'd known about Thomas, about the flash drive, and he'd called the evidence chain secure. My stomach turned. I went to the basement. The air grew colder as I descended, heavy with the smell of dust and concrete. The wine rack still leaned against the far wall, half empty. Bottles I hadn't touched since before the funeral. I knelt, running my fingers along the wood until I found it, a thin crack just beside the hinge. I pressed. The panel clicked open with a sigh, like an old secret finally exhaling. Inside, a small envelope, a single brass key, cold and smooth in my palm. I closed the panel and sat there for a long time, letting the silence settle. Then I heard it, a faint noise upstairs. Not a creak this time, but the muffled thud of footsteps. Slow. Careful. Someone was in the house. I stood, clutching the key tight enough to leave marks in my hand. The steps moved across the floor above, deliberate, searching. A floorboard groaned, the same one outside the study. I moved to the corner of the basement where the shadows were thickest and waited. My heartbeat sounded like thunder in my ears. Then the steps stopped. The quiet stretched until it almost broke me. Then came the voice. Alana? It was Evelyn. Her tone was soft, syrupy, the kind of voice she used when she wanted something. Alana, I know you're here. I just want to talk. I didn't answer. She took another step, her heels clicking against the hardwood. You've made this harder than it needed to be. Thomas is upset, but we can still fix it. We're family. The word hit like poison. She moved closer to the basement door. I'm coming down now. The hinges moaned as the door opened. A line of light cut through the darkness. I backed deeper into the shadows, one hand clutching the key, the other searching blindly for anything. A tool, a weapon, something. "Alana," she said again, her voice almost tender. "You don't want this to end badly." Her silhouette appeared at the top of the stairs. Elegant, deliberate, her face half lit by the hallway glow. "You should have stayed quiet," she whispered. Then, from outside, tires screeched. A car door slammed. "Police! Step away from the stairs!" Evelyn froze, the light flashing across her face. Confusion, then fury. She turned to run, but it was too late. Two officers burst through the front door, voices overlapping, commands sharp. The sound of metal cuffs echoed through the house like punctuation. I stayed in the dark until it was over. When I finally climbed the stairs, Detective Morgan was standing there, watching me. His eyes unreadable. "You okay?" he asked. I looked at him, at the faint smile that didn't reach his eyes, and I thought of David's warning. "Don't trust Morgan." "Yes," I said quietly. "For now." He nodded once slowly, then turned toward the door. I watched him leave, the red and blue lights flashing across the walls like ghosts arguing with the dark. And as the sirens faded, I looked down at the key still in my hand. It wasn't over. Not yet. I drove to the bank just after dawn. The sky was a bruised purple, early light cutting through mist like knives. The streets were empty, the world holding its breath, as if it too knew this was the moment that counted. The envelope and the key rested in my lap. I didn't touch them, didn't need to. My fingers traced the brass key unconsciously, feeling the cold weight of purpose. Each rotation, each edge, seemed to whisper David's voice. Finish what I couldn't. Inside the bank, the air smelled of polished wood, old leather, and subtle disinfectant, sterile yet intimate, like secrets held too long. Daniel Harper was waiting, same posture, same practiced calm. He didn't smile. His eyes held that careful observation that feels like a test. "Mrs. Pierce," he said, nodding. "Shall we?" The vault door loomed ahead. Massive, silent, a promise and a threat all in one. The walls hummed as if the building itself were alive, protecting the truth inside. I took the key from my purse, sliding it into the lock marked 17B. It clicked. The door swung open, heavy with anticipation, revealing a small compartment filled with envelopes, ledgers, and a small wooden box. Dust motes floated in the filtered light like tiny specters of memory. I knelt, running a fingertip across the envelopes. Each bore a name, a date, and a code. Evelyn's handwriting, precise, mechanical, like a ledger of sins. Then I opened the wooden box. Inside, neatly stacked, were the originals, transfer statements, authorization codes, receipts, proof of every illicit transaction, every laundered penny, every manipulation. I felt a quiet fury settle into my bones. Not rage, not grief, something sharper, cleaner. A plan forming in the empty spaces between breaths. I carried the box back to the desk, spreading its contents like a map of betrayal. Evelyn, Thomas, Marlene, each. Name etched into the paper like a target, and there it was. The damning proof that could dismantle the family. Empire in one calculated move. I paused, listening. The vault hummed, as if it too were aware of what I held. The papers felt alive in my hands. Then the bank door opened behind me. Footsteps, quick, confident. I didn't look up. My heart slowed, measured. Whoever it was, they were about to learn something important. I wasn't just the responsible one. I was the inheritor of truth, the keeper of justice. "Alana Pierce," a voice said, soft but firm. I turned, Thomas, stepping into the vault, face pale but mask intact. "You don't know what you're doing." "I know exactly what I'm doing," I replied. My voice was calm, deliberate, the kind of calm that terrifies people who depend on fear to control. He stepped closer. "This isn't just about money, it's family," I smiled faintly, holding the box close. "Family isn't defined by blood, Thomas. It's defined by loyalty. And you failed that test a long time ago. The tension stretched, taut, like a wire about to snap. Then I slid the box across the desk toward him. Carefully, slowly. The lawyer will review this. The evidence. Everything. Thomas's jaw tightened. You don't have the authority. I do, I said, cutting him off. I am co-owner. Every document says so. And David trusted me to finish what he couldn't. The words landed like hammers. His face went white. For the first time, I saw fear there. Genuine. Unmasked. I stood, brushing the dust from my hands. Consider this inheritance of ashes, Thomas. Because what you built on lies will burn, and you'll be left with nothing but smoke. He opened his mouth to reply, but I didn't wait. I turned, walking past him, past the vault door, out into the early morning light. The box remained on the desk. Evidence. Proof power. And as I stepped outside, the first rays of sun hit my face, golden and alive, warm against the chill of victory. I breathed in, slow, deliberate. The war had changed. Not over yet, but now the truth was mine. And that was all that mattered. The house felt different that night. Shadows pooled in corners like water, and every creak of the floorboards sounded like a warning. I hadn't planned to return, but some things couldn't wait for lawyers or banks. Some things required a reckoning. I parked a block away and walked up the driveway quietly. The glow from inside showed movement, soft, deliberate. Evelyn, alone. Or so it seemed. I stepped onto the porch. Her head lifted. A small smile played at her lips, sweet as honey but sharp as glass. "Alana," she said, voice even, controlled. "I wondered when you'd come back." "You knew I would," I replied, calm, measured. I didn't enter. I stayed on the steps, letting the night air wrap around me. The faint smell of her perfume lingered. Lavender, expensive, clinging like a warning. She tilted her head, pretending casualness. I didn't want to involve the police again. I thought, we could resolve this as a family. I laughed softly, bitter but quiet. You don't understand. There's nothing to resolve. You stole from a foundation, from people who trusted your name. From David. From me. Her smile faltered for the first time. I could see it. The twitch in her jaw, the blink that betrayed calculation. You think you can destroy me with papers? With a few signatures? I stepped closer. I don't think I know. The box, the ledger, the statements, everything is in the bank. Every illegal transfer, every shell account, every signature you forged. Her eyes narrowed, but there was panic behind them now, tiny and bright, like a flame struggling against the wind. You can't do this. I'm your family. Family isn't defined by blood, I said, voice steady, cold. It's defined by loyalty. And you failed that test a long time ago? She took a step toward me, threatening, desperate. You'll regret this. I can ruin you! They already tried, I interrupted, moving closer until our shadows mingled on the porch. But it won't work. Because I have the truth, and the law, and the one person you underestimated most of all, me. The air thickened, heavy with tension. I could see the way she calculated her next words, the way she tried to maintain control. But fear had crept in, subtle, almost imperceptible. You won't get away with this, she hissed. I already have, I said softly. Justice doesn't ask permission. It doesn't negotiate. I turned, leaving her on the porch. The door closed behind me, not with violence, but with inevitability. Evelyn's voice called after me once, sharp and futile. Alana! I didn't answer. The street was quiet again, the kind of quiet that follows storms. And in that stillness, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Clarity. Power, measured and precise. The war was over, not with fire, not with fists, but with truth. And the truth would outlast them all. Morning came soft and golden, spilling over the city like warm honey. I watched it from the kitchen window, the way it touched the edges of the trees, the sidewalk, the roof lines. Delicate, patient, unyielding. The same light had once fallen across David's face, and now it fell across mine, steady and knowing. I had gone through the vault, the letters, the ledgers, and the box, every document painstakingly cataloged, every code verified. By now I knew exactly what they'd done and exactly how to undo it. But the real revelation wasn't the evidence itself. It was the clarity that came with it, the awareness of who I was in the equation. I wasn't the quiet scapegoat anymore. I wasn't the one to sit politely while Evelyn smiled through theft and manipulation. I was the executor of truth. I held the legacy David had entrusted to me, not just financially, but morally. I realized the house, the bank accounts, the documents, they were never the point. The point was power. Real power comes not from possession but from understanding. I spent the day mapping it all out. Each transfer, each false signature, each lie wrapped in feigned affection. It was a lattice of betrayal, and I traced it back to its roots, tracing Evelyn and Thomas and Marlene to every false step they had taken. And then I mapped my counter, the legal moves, the evidentiary chain, the witnesses, everything designed to collapse their empire without a single reckless move. By dusk, I understood the final piece. The flash drive David had hidden, the one Marcus tried to compromise, the one Morgan pretended to secure, contained audio recordings. Conversations that proved intent, collusion, manipulation. If I presented this to the lawyer, the bank, the authorities, there could be no argument, no wriggling free. The revelation struck me not with joy, but with quiet satisfaction. Justice didn't have to scream. It didn't have to explode in headlines or dramatic courtroom moments. It could whisper. It could unfold quietly, inexorably, like the tide reclaiming sand. And as I sat there, the house finally quiet, I realized something else. This was bigger than revenge. This was empowerment. This was reclaiming what had been hidden, stolen, and twisted for greed. I pulled the flash drive from its hiding place and held it in my palm. Light flickered across its surface. It felt heavier than any paper, any deed, any ledger. Not heavy with burden, but with purpose, and I knew in that moment that nothing would ever be the same, for them or for me. The day arrived quietly, as though the world itself were holding its breath. I drove to the law firm early, the streets slick with rain, reflecting the dull gold of the morning sun. Everything looked ordinary, but I knew the undercurrent, the invisible tension humming beneath the surface. Today, the ledger, the flash drive, and the letters would meet the law. And for the first time, Evelyn and her allies would meet consequences. Inside the firm, the lawyer, a woman named Clarissa, greeted me with a calm smile, one that didn't hide the weight of what she was about to witness. "I've reviewed everything you sent," she said, handing me a folder. "But today we'll finalize the chain. The statements, the recordings, the letters. It's all here. It's airtight," I nodded, letting the gravity settle. No theatrics, no anger, just truth. By mid-morning, the conference room was full. Evelyn and Thomas arrived separately, carefully composed. Marlene followed, her eyes darting, measuring. The room smelled faintly of coffee and polished wood, the kind of sterile comfort designed to lull people into underestimation. Clarissa laid out the evidence, every transfer, every signature, every forged authorization, each piece meticulously connected to the next, a chain of betrayal no one could deny. Evelyn's composure faltered first, a flicker of fear passing through her eyes. Thomas shifted, restless. As the recordings played, Evelyn's voice, Thomas's admissions, Marlene's complicity, they had built their empire on lies, and each lie now echoed back at them with deafening clarity. Evelyn's hands trembled as she reached for a folder. This isn't real," she said, her voice cracking. "It is real," I said, calm, steady. "And you knew the risks when you decided to steal from the Foundation, from David, from me." Thomas swallowed hard. "You can't—" "We thought you underestimated me," I said, finishing his sentence for him. "Like you always did." Clarissa handed me a copy of the finalized transfer. The house, the bank accounts, the evidence, all legally and irrevocably under my control. I felt the weight of it in my hands, not greed, not triumph, but something quieter, heavier. Justice. The family remained silent, caught between shock and the bitter taste of their own guilt. Their empire, built on manipulation, now lay in ruins before them. And the most exquisite part was that I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't screamed. I hadn't needed to. The evidence did all the talking. When the meeting ended, I walked out of the conference room, the sunlight spilling across my path. For the first time in months, I felt the tension in my shoulders ease. The burden of truth had been laid out, and the fallout would unfold without me needing to chase it. Outside, the city moved on. People hurried past, unaware of the quiet storm that had reshaped one family forever. I felt a strange serenity. Revenge had been served not with cruelty, but with precision, patience, and justice. And as I drove home, the light touched the edges of the world in gold and fire. I realized that this reckoning wasn't just theirs. It was mine too. The reclamation of everything stolen, the affirmation of who I had become. The house was quiet in a way it had never been before, not haunted, not tense, not filled with whispers of betrayal. Just quiet. Soft light fell through the windows, golden and patient, touching every corner as though forgiving the past. I walked through each room slowly, my footsteps echoing on the polished wood, feeling the weight of everything David had entrusted to me. I stopped in the living room, the space where so many battles had been fought. In silence, in subtext, in hidden notes and subtle gestures, I ran my hand along the mantel, tracing the grain of the wood, and felt the pulse of memory beneath my fingertips. This house had been a battlefield. It had been a prison. And now, it was mine in every sense that mattered. The box of evidence, the letters, the flash drive, they were gone, secured with the lawyer and the authorities. Justice was no longer a plan. It was a living, breathing reality. Evelyn, Thomas, and Marlene would answer for their actions, not with theatrics or threats, but through the inevitability of law and truth. And that knowledge was its own quiet victory. I moved to the window and watched the garden, overgrown yet stubbornly alive. A single rose had bloomed amid the weeds, red and vivid, a tiny defiance against neglect. I smiled, letting the symbolism settle in my chest. Life persists. Truth persists. And now I persisted too. I opened the study, sat at David's desk, and touched the stack of unopened letters he had left behind. For months they had been silent, holding promises and warnings. I picked up one and read it again, letting his voice settle around me like a memory. Finish what I couldn't. I had. For the first time, I allowed myself to sit back and feel the transformation fully. I was no longer the quiet, underestimated woman, the family scapegoat, the responsible one who carried their expectations in silence. I was the architect of my own legacy, not defined by inheritance, but by integrity, intelligence, and unwavering patience. Outside, the sun rose higher, bathing the house in light. I walked to the front door, opening it wide. The air was crisp, alive. The street stretched before me, ordinary and promising. I stepped onto the porch and inhaled deeply, letting the scent of earth and new beginnings fill me. I turned back once, letting my eyes linger on the house, the place of betrayal, discovery, and triumph. Then, with deliberate calm, I closed the door behind me, and I knew, as the light settled across the lawn, that this was more than a victory. It was a foundation, not just for wealth, not just for revenge, but for legacy. A legacy built on truth, on courage, on the quiet strength of a woman who refused to be erased. The house remained behind me, steadfast. The past, reclaimed. And I walked forward into the dawn, the weight of injustice lifted, leaving only the promise of what could grow from what remained.